Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of the Mildly Interesting podcast. This episode, we actually have two updates for you. We're going to update you on the Iranian protests and the current situation right now. And we're also going to talk about the Russian-Ukrainian war, specifically the missiles that hit a Polish village just within their borders. If you like the stuff that we do, of course, give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram. Hit that bell on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, follow us on Spotify, rate the podcast as always, and we have a website as well, mildly-interesting.co.uk. But without further ado, my name is Akash Lush.
And I'm Jules Santos.
And this is Mildly Interesting.
Mildly interesting.
No, seriously, just mildly interesting.
Now, we are all obviously watching the Russian-Ukrainian situation with anxious eyes, but up until now, it's been somewhat a self-contained situation where the combatants are really only Russians, sort of far western forces, and the Ukrainian military. So up until now, it's been somewhat of a contained situation, but that's all up in the air, as just on Tuesday evening, Poland's military was placed on high alert after a missile landed on its own territory, killing 2 people. It came as both Russia and Ukraine had just freshly fired some missiles, Russia firing dozens of missiles at targets in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian forces shooting missiles to sort of missiles, if that makes sense, to shoot them down. Now, early reports have said that the NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg, has said that Kiev's air defenses were, quote-unquote, most likely to blame. However, Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has said that he has received assurances from his top commanders that it wasn't, quote-unquote, wasn't our missile. So Santos, what do we know? How much of the situation do we know? And how certain are we where this missile came from?
So the answer to both of those questions is not much. So we don't know much about it, and we don't know much about whether it came from Ukraine or Russia. The fact that the UN Chief Secretary is saying that it probably came from Ukraine is kind of a sort of guarantee, I suppose. So if that's anything to go by, I suppose that's what you could say. So it's believed, so this is, again, not certain, but it's believed that the missile came from a S-300, which is essentially anti-missile sort of weaponry. And essentially the speculation is that Russia was targeting sites in Ukraine that are close to this side of the Polish border, so they're within 10 kilometers, I think that's what I read. And so obviously Ukraine, trying to defend itself, fired missiles, and one of them probably ended up going rogue, and it was just an unfortunate accident, I suppose, is the narrative here. Although where it came from is obviously very important, because it just decides whether this was meant to happen, whether this was a test or wasn't. But sort of the consequences, I think, are what are most interesting about this, because obviously if it were from Russia, it would have been a completely different can of beans, because they would activate essentially Articles 4 and 5 of the UN Charter. And Akash, why don't you tell us what are the Articles 4 and 5 of the UN Charter?
So Poland is obviously a member of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a political and military alliance of a total of 30 members that's spanning most of Europe and includes the USA. So this is a political and specific and military alliance. It was formed kind of during the Cold War in order to stop the rise of communism and the influence of Soviet Russia, obviously during the Iron Curtain over most of Eastern Europe. Now, it's very interesting because Article 4 is not too crucial, or not critical, let's say, for lack of a better term. But what Article 4 is it when a member state invokes Article 4, it begins a process which leads to consultation between the member country or countries with NATO's most senior decision-making body, the North Atlantic Council, or the NAC. Meetings of the NAC actually take place very regularly to discuss, sort of the ongoings of the organization and sort of the daily running of it. But Article 4 makes the NAC prioritize this specific member country, whoever invoked it, their concerns for consultation. And their issue will be addressed immediately. And the reason why this is kind of the reason why people are speculating that this could lead to something more is because Article 4 is a step on the path to a NATO response should the NAC consultation deem that there are grounds to move forward. So Article 4 can be triggered when a member or members believe that their territorial integrity, political independence, or security is threatened, and it has been invoked only on about 7 occasions throughout the lifespan of NATO, so since 1949. It was invoked in March by 8 NATO countries following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Turkey invoked it twice in 2015, once in 2015 and twice in 2012, with one of the incidents being its fighter jets being shot down by the Syrian air defense. Under the Article 4 consultation process with NATO and the NAC, Patriot missiles were deployed into Turkey. So as you can see, Article 4 leads to, or could lead to, a response from NATO as a collective. And this could lead to a decision to invoke Article 5, which is described as the cornerstone of NATO. So this is NATO's collective defense principle that was developed to create a mutual protective pact in order to counter the risks, like I said, posed by the Soviet Union, particularly in Eastern Europe following World War II. Committing to Article 5 means that each NATO member knows that if one of the alliance is the victim of an armed attack, each and every other member of the alliance will consider this an act of violence as an armed attack against all members. So to put it in short, if you mess with one of us, you mess with all 30 of us. So it's important to note that Article 5 specifically states that each NATO member is obligated to, quote, take the actions it deems necessary to assist the ally attacked. So even if Article 5 is invoked, it's not full-out war. It's not everyone gets their hands dirty. It's up to each state to decide how involved they want to be and how much aid militarily or financially they want to give to the member states in danger or who the attack was against. So obviously, with the wording of these, it sounds like it's very much a possibility that Article 4 can be invoked, and somewhere in the near future, Article 5 could be invoked as well. Santos, how do you see this playing out? Honestly, because if Poland, well, first of all, do you think Poland will invoke Article 4? And if so, where do you think it'll go from there?
I mean, it's definitely possible that Article 4 would be invoked here, which, like you said, would only call for a meeting, essentially. That's all it would do. And then all the countries would essentially decide, well, let's not start World War III yet. So nothing would really come from then. If Article 5 is invoked, again, that probably wouldn't happen. I don't see a future where that would happen. Not because of this specific incident, just because, one, it's not really known where it came from, like, specifically. Two, it's believed it came from Ukraine, so that's just counterintuitive, especially because it wasn't an active war, and it wasn't. If that's the case, it was an accident for sure. And three, as much as everyone got their panties in a fire on that day. Even I did, thinking, well, that's it. I'm gonna be enlisting to the military and I'm gonna fight for my country, comrade. That's essentially what everyone was saying at the time. But if you think about it for a second, Russia has been, in its attack of Ukraine, has been in this middle ground where, well, Ukraine is not part of NATO. So therefore, they can attack Ukraine without, a repercussion, without warfare repercussions other than military aid, equipment. That is. So if it were to attack a NATO member, it would just lose those privileges that, in war mentality, that would not make sense, right? That would be foolish. And sure, Putin has made a lot of big mistakes in its invasion, but I think starting World War III isn't one that he's going to make anytime soon. So, in response to you, I don't think in the future, if something else happens, maybe Article 4 may be invoked. I mean, you had in the G20, they were talking about it essentially at length. So maybe, but Article 5, I don't think would ever be invoked, not for this anyway.
Going on from the very serious question of will NATO respond to Russian provocation, we're going to, turn it down slightly, turn it down a few notches, and ask probably the most stupidest questions we can think of. It's back to a classic segment of ours. Stupid questions. Santos, what question have you brought to the table today?
So I just want to preface this by saying I don't know why we've sort of abandoned this segment. This is actually a really good segment, and it's kind of flown under the radar with all of the other segments we've got. But my dumb question. All right, let me start this off by saying, the ocean, right? It's pretty deep. There's a lot of it, right?
Right. Okay.
Sponges, right?
Right.
The animals, think of Patrick in SpongeBob, right?
Right, yes.
Okay, now. No, sorry, it's not Patrick. Think of, SpongeBob in SpongeBob. Sorry.
Yeah. No,
So, how much deeper would the oceans be if sponges didn't live there?
That is... Huh.
Exactly. Yep.
I did not think of that. Wow.
Exactly. So I think we've just uncovered what the sort of secret for fighting climate change is.
Wait, so we put more sponges?
If sea levels get too high,
right,
you sponge them up.
Right. Okay. Right.
You can, and then you can stockpile sponges, right? And then if we start to have less ocean, we can just squeeze them up, and then we have a lot of ocean.
Okay. I have a question though.
Go on.
You take a sponge and you put it in the water. it soaks
Right.
up the water, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But the water is still there. It's just in the sponge.
Listen,
So-
Akash, you need to take that tinfoil hat off your head. Don't believe what what the masses are telling you. Don't believe what the government is telling you, Akash.
Okay.
Oli, we are professional in this podcast. Please act as such. Keep an open mind.
Okay. Right.
Right, how about you? Tell me your dumb question. Go on.
Okay. Here's my dumb question. And I think okay. Hair, right?
Right.
Hair. We all
Yep.
know and love it. As most of our viewers can see, I very much love my hair by how much I'm trying to kill it off with color. Now,
And I do have a lot
here's the thing.
of that.
Here's the thing, right? Hair, like, okay. So, hair in your nose, I get, right? Because it, like, it kind of, like, filters the, it's supposed to, like, filter the air or something? Or, like, catch, like, like, all I know is hair in your nose has a functionality. Other than just,
Right.
it just is there, right? Here's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know eyebrows and eyelashes have a function because they like catch the sweat that comes off your forehead or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's my thing. Here's my thing, right? Why do we have hair anywhere else? Why is that a thing? Like, it doesn't functionally need to be there. And everyone's like, oh, the hair on your head is to protect your scalp. It's to... Yeah, but bald people exist. And they live fine lives. Look at fucking Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. My man's bald as hell, and he's living a great life. Better than mine. And I have a full set of hair. So, why do we need... Why have we evolved with hair on our heads? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because it doesn't and like
So
it's the same. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Do you want the actual answer, or do you want me to support you in being a supportive friend?
What
do you actually want here, Akash?
What's the science?
The science is we have hair so we stay warmer through the winter. It also helps regulate temperature. So, yeah, that is the actual answer to your question. Yeah.
So what you're saying is, functionally, my body is more adaptable than that of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Is that what you're saying right now? Because
if you were to go to Antarctica with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, you'd be, better off from the cold. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, I feel better now. I still stand by my point and say this is okay. In reality, I love my hair, and I hope I don't become one of those men that at 30 I immediately pufferfish and like lose all my hair. However, for the bit, I'm saying this: there is no good reason why we evolved with hair on our head, and I would not mind being a Mr. Clean looking person. Because
Mr. Clean.
That just why not?
You're just jealous of The Rock, to be honest. Let's be honest. That's all there is to this. Right, so we often try not to cover the same topic, so the same stories almost, so closely together. And when we last talked about Iran, that was only a few episodes ago, we went over the start of the protests, what they were about, and what we thought would happen in the future. Now, I doubt any of us would have guessed that what happened would actually happen. But before that, if you need a refresher, here's what's happening essentially. So although the protests had really started, I don't know, in February, around February with the teacher strikes, the ongoing sort of like civil war, almost the civil unrest that we're seeing now, in Tehran, and it was due to 20-year-old Masa Amini being essentially jailed by the morality police. And if you think such a thing as the morality police should not exist, then you're right, but it does in Iran. So she was arrested and beaten to death for not wearing the hijab as the government mandate in Iran. After that, the protests about the hijab exploded, essentially. And over time, they transformed from hijab wearing to the role of men and women in Iran. And now it's just essentially a protest about freedom of speech, of expression in Iran, amongst other things, obviously. So why are we talking about this today again, Akash? What has happened since we last covered it, and why does it matter so much?
So, essentially what we're seeing is the Iranian security forces cracking down hard on protesters, which they have classified as rioters. And not only that, but we've seen them push this narrative that these people are not acting on their own accord. This is actually the influence of foreign entities. I think the news story grabbing the most headlines right now is the fact that two children were shot dead by security forces during anti-government protests in southwestern Iran on Wednesday. State media, however, reported something a little different. They reported that 7 people, including these 2 children, were killed by gunmen on motorbikes in a terrorist attack. This is contrary to video footage and testimonies by family members of the 2 children who were shot, that shows security personnel firing live rounds, killing Kian Perfelak, who was 9 years old, and Sepehr Magsoudi, who was just 14 years old. At least 13 people were said to have been killed elsewhere on the same day. Like Santos said, this is due to the fact that there have been waves of street demonstrations and strikes in major cities. And it all started because of Masa Amini, but it kind of just, the ball has kept rolling, and the most recent demonstrations were in response to calls to commemorate those killed in a similar bloody crackdown on November 2019, where people took to the streets to protest fuel prices. So far, at least 362 protesters, including 56 children, have been killed and 16,000 arrested, as security forces have struggled to suppress what Iran's leaders have, like I said, classified as riots, according to the Iranian human rights activist news agency, they've also reported the death of 46 security personnel, although the state media is, again, they're reporting something different. They claim that these security personnel were killed by these rioters and other sort of terrorists funded by foreign forces. So what are they doing to these protesters, Santos? Because they've detained 16,000 protesters, and just a few days ago, a revolutionary court in Tehran found an arrested protester guilty of committing, quote-unquote, enmity against God, and sentenced them to death for the first time. Do we really see this government sentencing 16,000 people and many more that they're detaining every day? Do we see them? Are we going to see mass executions?
Right, so here's the thing. Short answer, probably yes. And the reason for that is that Iran, as it is believed to sort of like execute more people annually than any other country other than China, right? So as it stands, at least 20 of those protesters are facing charges that are punishable by death. And I just want to reiterate, by the way, the stories that we're covering today happened both on the 14th of November, that's this Iran story, of the first person being, found, quote unquote, guilty, and punished by death. And the Russia story happened on the 15th. So this has been a week and a half.
It's been a busy
us.
week.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for us. So the short answer to your question is yes, probably. And by the way, I just want to clarify something, because I saw there was a bit of misconfusion by the Canadian government. I don't know if you saw that, but essentially, the official Twitter account for the Canadian government tweeted out that there were 15,000 people sentenced to death in Iran. And while the stories coming out of Iran are indeed bleak, it's not gotten this bad yet, and I really hope it doesn't. So no, not 15,000 people have been sentenced to death. There are 16,000 people arrested, and dozens of them are on trial, essentially facing charges that could amount to the death penalty. This, by the way, comes after the Iranian government voted on an overwhelming majority to, uphold the death penalty, which it makes it one of the few countries where it still exists. And yeah, this is just just worse and worse news coming out of Iran. The only good thing though is that protests just don't seem to stop, which is obviously a great thing. People are just not, they're afraid, they're terrified, but they're still got fight in them, which is obviously inspiring to see. And on the point that you made about the two boys that were shot dead by security forces, even if it were true what they did, I don't think you can call a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old terrorists, regardless of what they do, really. They're 9 and 14. That's not, even if they did do it, I don't think they actually knew what they would be doing. So to shoot them dead is probably a bit of an overreaction, if you ask me. But yeah, it just doesn't seem to get better. I'm really hopeful for the protests and the way they're going, so hopefully it will get better on that end. But what do you think, Akash? Do you think it's gonna get better from here? Do you think it's gonna get worse before it gets better? Like, what's your supervisions for the future?
I think the last time we talked about this, I did say it's going to get worse before it gets better, and lo and behold, it has. It wasn't hard to call. Like you said, an overwhelming majority, 272 out of 290 members of Iran's parliament voted to uphold the death penalty. And last week, Judiciary Chief Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei declared that key perpetrators of this, what the government has proclaimed a riot, should be identified as soon as possible and handed sentences that would have a deterrent effect on others. He warned that rioters could be charged with moharebe, which is enmity against God, as we've seen for the first death penalty that's been handed out, efsad fil arz, which is corruption on earth, and baghi, which is armed rebellion, all of which carry the death penalty in Iran's Sharia-based legal system. And more than 2,000 people have already been charged with participating in the recent riots. So there's a potential that those 2,000 people are already going to be fast-tracked into being charged with one of these punishable by death crimes. We have seen the international community do what they do best and just kind of come together and make sanctions. The EU has imposed sanctions on about 29 Iranians and 3 entities that it said were responsible for the suppression of protesters. Among those targeted were Interior Minister Ahmed Vahidi, the Morality Police Squad that arrested Mahsa Amini, the provincial heads of law enforcement forces and Islamic Revolution Guard Corps. But for now, I think we've seen regimes as oppressive of this before, and history is known to repeat itself if you do not learn from it. And it seems like those in power in Iran have not learned from history, because it's very hard to keep hold of a regime and continue a regime when you do not have the backing of the general populace. If history does repeat itself, and I believe it usually does, these protesters will one day be sort of celebrating in the streets for their victory. And hopefully, we're all obviously praying for Iran, but hopefully that day comes soon. And with that, we wrap up another episode of the Mildly Interesting podcast. As always, we hope you were mildly interested. If you like the stuff that we do, obviously, go check out our website. Santos has painstakingly kept up with it. It's mildly-interesting.co.uk. We have Instagram and Twitter. Go follow us. We post updates and stuff like that. Some funny memes sometimes. We go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that bell so you know when we upload. And follow us on Spotify. Also hit that bell. Rate the podcast. Just get yourself notified about whenever we have a fresh episode right out the oven. So without further ado, though, I am Akash.
And I was Santos.
And this was Mildly Interesting.